All right, go ahead and find again Revelation chapter 2. And we're going to start in verse 12. And we're going to be looking at John's letter to the church at Pergamos. Actually, this letter, I think, is more applicable to the church in our culture and our society. We talked last week about persecution and church persecution, and we acknowledge that we really don't experience that. That's just not our experience. It's especially nothing like they did during that time, and nothing like many Christians in many parts of the world today. So the enemy uses another tactic, and this is a tactic that I think he uses in our lives and in our culture pretty effectively. And it is compromise. He gets us to a place as a people, he gets us to a place as a church where we compromise. Let me just go ahead and read the passage before I start preaching and forget to read it, right? So let me just go ahead and read it and make some points here. He says, "And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, these things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name. And you did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you, because you have there who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly, and I will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it." So he talks to them about, he says that the thing that he has against them is that they have these two people, these Balaam, and the story of Balaam and Balak, where he taught them to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel, and about these Nicolaitans. Okay, I'm just going to say this right up front. We're going to talk about the Balaam and Balak because I know what that's about. The truth is, we don't really know what these Nicolaitans are about. They're mentioned 2 times in Revelation. They're nowhere else in the Bible. We really don't even have much historical writings that tell us what they were and what John might have been referring to here. There's some conjecture, but it's okay because we have the story of Balaam and Balak. So he mentions them, and so we can get from them and understand what he's trying to talk about here. And he's talking about compromise. The story of Balaam and Balak is found in Numbers chapters 22 through 25. And in essence, this is the story. This is during Israel's 40-year wandering in the wilderness. And they come into the land of Moab. And there's this king named Balak. And he sees, you're talking upwards of 2 million people that are on the move. And he looks down and he sees all these millions of people. And he goes, they're going to destroy our land. They're going to destroy our land. And, it won't be worth it. I got to do something about these people. So he sends for this prophet. And this guy's name is Balaam. And Balaam is apparently a true prophet of God. And but he is a Gentile. He's not an Israelite. But apparently he's truly a prophet of the true God. So Balak sends some people, a little entourage and some gifts. And they go to Balaam and they say to him, Balak wants you to come and he wants you to curse these people who are invading our land. And Balaam says, well, I'm going to have to pray about it. And he comes back and he says, I can't go. God told me not to go. And so they leave. And so Balak then sends another entourage of more important people and a lot better gifts. And he says, and I'm going to do, Balaam, whatever you want me to do, if you'll just come and curse these people who are invading our land. So Balaam prays again. And it's a weird answer that he gets to his prayer. And actually what he does is he gets the answer he wants. That's really not the way to say it. he makes sure that the answer that he gets is the one that he wants. You ever do that when you pray? I know you don't. But I have. Where we pray about something, but we're going to kind of manipulate the thing so that we make sure that the answer that we get is the answer that we want. I don't know. So Balaam does that, and he comes back and he tells us. So it's compromise. He's compromising. He's step number one of compromise. So he comes back and he tells the guys, okay, sure, I'll go. And so they start going. And this is the story of where the donkey talks to the guy, right? It's Balaam's donkey. And, they're going, and Balaam, the donkey talking to him is not important for what I'm saying today, but that's just part of it where, the donkey sees the spirit of the Lord's trying to stop him. The spirit of the Lord's standing there with a sword. And the donkey sees it, but Balaam doesn't see it. And first of all, the donkey smashes his leg up against the wall. Or I think, first of all, he went off the road and went into a field. And Balaam whips him up. And then he's in a narrow way, and he smashes his leg against the wall, trying to walk around this angel of the Lord. And then the third time, the donkey finally just lays down. And again, this isn't even important. I don't even know why I'm telling it to you. Finally, the donkey just lays down. Balaam beats him again. God opens the donkey's mouth, and the donkey says, "What's up with you, man? Don't you see the spirit of the Lord standing there with the sword that's trying to tell us not to go?" And Balaam's like, "No, I didn't see it." Anyhow, so they go on by, and they come to the land, and they come to Moab, and Balak says to Balaam, he says, "Okay." He says, "I'm going to take you up on some lookout points. You're going to look out. You're going to see all these people, and I want you to curse them." And so Balaam goes up there. They do some sacrifice to the Lord because he needs to hear from the Lord. And Balaam's intention is to curse them. All right? But God won't let him. And every time he opens his mouth, it comes out as a blessing. And he ends up blessing them instead. And Balak's like, "Look, I've offered you gold and silver. I'm giving you..." And he does it like 3 times. He does it like 3 times. And every time he tries to curse them, he blesses them. In fact, I think the last time, it says he doesn't even try to curse them. He just goes ahead and just blesses them because he knows that's what God's going to do anyhow. And so then what happens is, Balaam leaves and he goes back home. And we have this little insight here in Revelation chapter 2, verse 14, where it says that Balaam taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel. So apparently Balaam gave Balak some advice. And it's some advice that Balak clearly follows in the Numbers chapter 22 through 25 passage. So what Balak does is he goes down to these people and he befriends them, and they kind of just start having get-togethers, and they have a party together. And he brings in all his beautiful women so that these beautiful women can entice the Israelite men. And once they entice these Israelite men, they connect themselves to these beautiful Moabite women. And then they are willing to take it even another step after they've already compromised, knowing that God declared for them to stay among themselves. They've already compromised that. That's one step. I'll take a foreign wife. The next step was pretty easy. After that, it was, okay, now I have a foreign wife. Now I have a foreign culture. Now I'll have a foreign God. And they began to bow down and worship the false gods of Moab. So that's the idea here that's in Revelation chapter 2, that it was a step-by-step compromise to bring the people to compromise what they really believed and who they really were, and thus it became a stumbling block to the Lord. Not to the Lord, to them. Once they compromised, they themselves, in a weird sort of way, invoked God's anger upon them. So Balaam didn't have to curse them. He just had to get them to compromise, and then God would take care of the punishment of them on his own. I think this is the exact tactic that Satan uses in our lives and in our culture and in our church. I say our church, I mean the church in America, in this environment that we live in, and in our personal lives. If he can just get us to compromise our true faith, he doesn't have to worry about persecuting us. He doesn't have to worry about having a curse put on us, because once we compromise, we bring the consequences of our sin upon ourselves from God. So just in thinking about this compromise, just as a church, and I really don't want to focus here. I'm really going to focus on us as individuals. But I did want to just bring this up as a church, because I've been reading over your church constitution a lot lately, because I know you guys are going through it. And first of all, your church constitution I'm not here to disparage it in any way. It's like everybody else's. I mean, it is on par with everybody else's. So there's nothing wrong with it. But there are a couple things that, and these are always just kind of little, they really have more to do with my philosophy of who we are to be as a church. And just to give you a little insight. Church constitutions are great. They're also necessary. And like church covenants. And you have a church covenant in your church constitution. But here's what we have to be careful of. We have to be careful that with church covenants and church constitutions, that we don't compromise, number one, our real purpose as a people of God. And that purpose, listen y'all, and you're going to think this is just a matter of words, but it's not. So I'll ask you to stay with me. Our purpose is to make disciples, not make church members. Oh, but it's the truth. And you may say, well, that's just a matter of semantics. No, it's really not. A good church member shows up often and frequently. They come to worship. They come to Bible study. They give a tithe. They find a ministry to be involved in and be plugged into. That's a good church member. I'll take 10. All right? Give us 10. If we were to get 10 a year, we would just be ecstatic. Here's the problem. The core problem. Did you know that you can do all of those things and still be lost? You know that? You can show up to church frequently and often. You can give a tithe. You can be involved in a ministry and still be lost. Our goal is not to make good church members. Our goal is to make disciples. Here's the thing. If you make someone a true disciple who's committed to Christ, committed to following Christ, committed to following the ways of Christ and the things of Christ, you know what? They'll be a good church member. They will. They really will. It'll just be a part of their relationship with God. They'll gather with the people of God, and they'll participate with the people of God in the mission of God and in the worship of God. We have to be careful that that a church covenant doesn't become okay, you're saved, that's great, and that's fine. But actually, you need more than just being saved. That's exactly what was happening in the book of Galatians, when Paul's letter to the Galatians. You should go read that. And you should get you an English translation that you can understand well, and ask God to just open your heart and open your mind. Let me tell you something. Paul was going off the rails on these people. Because here's what they had done. They had said, okay, you've been saved, and that's great. They said, but now you have got to being saved is great, but now we need to add to that, you also need to be, for them it was a Jew. You need to be a good Jew. It was their particular religious denomination. And so they said, being saved is great, but now what you really need is to become a good Jew. We do the same thing if we're not careful with our church covenants. We do the same thing. Being saved is great, but now what you really need is you need to become a good Baptist. And these are all the ways, and these are all the things that make you a good Baptist. We have to be very careful that we don't somehow compromise that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone. And it is not of works, lest anyone should boast. It is the gift of God. And you add and can add and need to add absolutely nothing to it. Nothing. I like what Paul says in Galatians chapter 3:3. And I was trying to read through Galatians to pick out the perfect verse that I wanted to bring out. But he just says this. He says, are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? And it was a rhetorical question. He was saying, you got saved in the Spirit, so now are you going to stay saved by the flesh? And the rhetorical question he's implying is, the answer is no. You are saved by grace through faith in the working of the Spirit. And I got to tell you something. That's how you're going to stay saved. It's by grace through faith and it's through the working of the Spirit. You're not going to stay saved because you become a good church member. I'm sorry. Now, if you become a good disciple, you're going to be a good church member. We're not going to have to worry about that. But I'm just telling you, there's no gold stars in the book of life for being a great church member. There's just not. It's all about grace through faith, and it's about the working of the Spirit of God. We have to be careful that we don't compromise through these different things. Our core beliefs and the core of who we really are. We are the people of God on mission with God to fulfill His purposes, which is to make disciples of all nations. Really, I wanted to talk about this individually, and I wanted to talk about compromise in our lives. And, I don't even know where to start. I was just trying to think of a lot of different ways in which compromise seeps in. And it's really easy for us to just compromise. And I'm trying to think, should I start hard or should I start light or should I go hard in the middle? I don't even know. Where do I start? Where do I start? Let's just say that you're a person and you understand that gossip and being divisive is wrong. And you understand that God doesn't like that. And then, one day your very best friend in the church calls you up and they are just slaying someone with their tongue. I mean, just cutting their throat. And in such a way that is so hurtful and it is so divisive. What are you going to do? I mean, are you really going to tell your very best friend, you know what, you're wrong for doing this? Are you? And it's easy. All of these situations that I'm going to bring up, it's easy to sit in the pew and here on Sunday morning and say what we would do. But when we get put in those situations, it's a lot more difficult. Most people would say they don't like someone who lies. Most people would say they hate a lie. And yet some of these same things, we might just do a little cheat on our income tax, not a big one, just a little bit. Maybe you have a little income that came in somehow that's unreported income, and do I really? Should I? I don't really. It's really not that much. Should I really report it? Well, if you hate lying, then yeah, you probably should report it. What about, guys, let's say you come to this period in your life and you're about to get the perfect job. It's the job. This job was made for you, and you were made for this job. And it's going to provide for you and for your family and for its future. And you've been through almost all of the process, and they love you, and they pretty much just promised you the job without promising it to you. You just got to that point. They said, but we need to get together one more time, so we're going to get you together with the top 3 of the company or whatever tomorrow evening. So meet us up here. We're going to go out. What are you going to do when you get in the car and they pull up at the strip club? No, I'm serious. Don't think that doesn't happen. What are you going to do? Are you going to compromise? Are you going to even compromise just a little bit? Is it really going to hurt anything to just walk in there for an hour and just, so you can get this job? And what are you going to do? Young people. And if you didn't like that one, you're really not going to like this one. But you young people, what are you going to do when you finally meet the one that God has set aside for you? And I'm talking about you finally meet the one that you know God has created for you. And the two of you are to spend your life together. And you love them desperately. You love them with all of your heart. What are you going to do when that time comes? And you know what God's Word says about intimacy before marriage. And what are you going to do when that time comes and the two of you find yourselves alone and you love each other and you know you're going to be married and you know that God has brought you together? And I'm saying that those are the facts. Let's say those are the facts. Let's say God has brought the two of you together, that you truly are the ones that God has created for each other. But you find yourself in a situation and you're alone together and you want to share yourself. And you've done some little things that have kind of led up to, now you got to decide. Are we going to compromise? There are so many places in our lives, there are so many things that come into our lives where we can compromise the core things that we believe in and the core values of our faith. And what I really want to point out today is that compromise has consequences. And I really want to talk about what we need to do to overcome and to help us overcome and win out over compromise. And I'll try to be quick. I'll try to not spend a whole lot of time on these points. I'll just make them and then move on. You know, I wonder sometimes why we compromise. And I don't know if this is why, but here's the thing. You know what? You cannot lose your salvation. Okay? And I want to make that clear. When you're truly born again, you can't lose that. When you truly have been sealed by the Spirit of God, that is there forever. 1 Peter, what is it? What do I have? 1 Peter 1, 3 through 5. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has begotten us again unto a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Listen, to an inheritance that is incorruptible, undefiled, never fades away. Catch those words. Incorruptible, undefiled, never fades away. Your salvation never goes away. Never, never, never. Reserved in heaven for you, and this is the key here, it's reserved in heaven for you who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. You are kept because of God's power, not because of what you do or don't do. God does the saving, God does the keeping. All right? And there's a lot of real freedom in that. And you may say, you saying you can be saved and do whatever? That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I don't compromise that I believe salvation is by grace. And I won't compromise that. But I think that poses a problem for us is because we know we're not going to lose our salvation. We know we don't lose it. So we're going to turn to Paul and look at a couple of things that Paul says. The first thing is in 1 Corinthians 10, 23. Let me see if I can get that right quick. Notice what Paul says. I probably did these in the reverse order. I probably should have done the other one first. Listen to what Paul says. He says, all things are lawful for me. I want you to catch this. Paul says, I can do anything I want to. He says, all things are lawful for me. You're not going to lose your salvation. Paul says, all things are lawful for me. He says, but not all things are helpful. And all things are lawful for me, but not everything edifies. And in other words, not everything builds me up. And not everything builds up my relationship with God. Run it through that filter. Whatever it is, first and foremost, run it through that filter. Does it edify and does it build up my relationship with God? Because I'm going to tell you what. No, you will not lose your salvation. But let me tell you what you will lose. You will lose your fellowship with God. It will cut you off from an intimacy with God. And I have a couple more verses, and I'm not really going to read them, but you can write them down. Psalm 66:18, Isaiah 59:2. Listen, strong verses where God was talking to his people. And he basically says, he's not telling them they're going to lose their salvation, but he's telling them, you are separated from me. There's no need for you to pray for me because I'm not even listening. He tells them, I'm not even looking at you. No, you won't lose your salvation, but you will lose your fellowship with God, your intimacy with God. You will lose your praying power. You will lose that praying ground that we think we stand on. We'll lose it. Everything does not build us up. In fact, 1 John 1, 1:6? 1 John 1:6 exactly. It says, if anyone says that he has fellowship with him, fellowship with God, but he walks in darkness, he lies and does not practice the truth. We can't say that we have fellowship with God if we're walking in darkness. Doesn't mean you're lost. It means you ain't walking with God. It means you're not in fellowship with him. It means that you have no right to expect all of those blessings and all of those things that we so desperately want, need, and desire from God. So the second one is kind of similar. 1 Corinthians 6:12. 1 Corinthians 6:12. It's actually in the same kind of format there, where Paul says this. He says, all things are lawful for me. He says it again, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Here's a good one. Here's a good one. And this has to do with, especially people with addictive kind of personalities. Does this thing have the ability to control me? He says, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Is this something that my personality is susceptible, that this thing could begin to control my life? It could begin to dominate my thinking. It could begin to dominate what my pursuits are, that this thing can just absolutely control me. If it can control you, and I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head and can't, of something that's really not bad but can still control you, that we don't look at as bad but can still control you. I'm telling you, even if you don't look at it as something bad, if it's got the ability to control you, it's bad for you. It's bad for you. Everything is lawful, but does it control us? Which is going to lead me perfectly to my next point. Because what does Paul say in Ephesians? Be not drunk with wine, which is in excess. He says, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. You see, here's my next point. Here's one of the reasons that we compromise. Here's one of the ways to keep us from compromising, is, I guess, the way I want to approach this one, is we need to be a people who are walking in the Spirit. We need to be walking in the Spirit. Galatians 5:16, and again, Galatians is all about this whole thing, compromise that I was talking about. And especially in chapter 5, he's talking about, the fruits of the Spirit versus the works of the flesh. And, how do you make sure you get one and not the other? And he says that if you walk in the Spirit, you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So if we walk in the Spirit, we will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Here's the problem. Do any of you think you could actually, and you don't even have to raise your hand, but I don't want you to raise your hand, but I just want you to think about this for a second. If I were to say to you, just give a very simple definition of what it means to walk in the Spirit, what would you say to yourself? And here's my premise, and the reason I ask that. I think we have so mystified walking in the Spirit that we don't even know what it is. And we couldn't explain what it was if our life depended on it, and somebody's asking us, well, what does it mean to walk in the Spirit? How do I do it? I'm going to redneck it up for you. Okay? That's my way of saying, I'm going to make it simple. And actually, it's not me that makes it simple. It's Paul that makes it simple. He's going to make it very simple, but we've so blinded ourselves with all this mystical stuff that we totally miss the simplicity of what it means. This is great. Romans chapter 8, verse 5. It's simple. When you see it, you're going to go, what? It's so simple. Romans chapter 8, verse 5. Those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. You see how simple that, thank you. You see how simple that is? To live according to the Spirit, to walk in the Spirit is simple. We set our minds on the things of the Spirit. Set your minds daily and constantly daily on spiritual things. Read the Bible. If you don't read it, but for 3 minutes, that's fine. I was going through the foyer this morning and I noticed on this wall, there's a rack and there's some little books in there called Open Windows. You can grab one of those. You can read that thing in about 2 minutes. And it's got a scripture in there and it's got a spiritual thought. Listen, it helps you set your mind on spiritual things. Do it when you wake up. Do it at lunch, at work. Do it whenever you have 2 minutes. It just helps you put your mind on spiritual things. You can do spiritual music. And I confess I don't do this. I'm not a big music person. But those of you who love music and love to sing, click on some Christian radio. And those songs will minister to you, man. And they'll make you think about spiritual things. Paul talks about praying without ceasing. And I think that's what he's trying to get to. It's a constant, daily, minute by minute reminder that we need to be putting our mind on spiritual things. My wife and daughter and I, and not Hayden just because he won't do it, but I'm teasing Hayden. But my wife and daughter and I, We text each other all day throughout the whole day. Any of y'all do that? I mean, we'll just do stupid joke, one of those stupid little gifts, or, it's not always important, but just all day, throughout the day, Cheryl and Jordan and I are just sending messages back and forth. We're just staying in touch. We're just being goofy sometimes. Sometimes we're a little more serious. Sometimes we're not serious. Sometimes we really got something to say. Sometimes we really got nothing to say. I guess we just miss each other so much because we were just such an awesome family, and so we have to talk to each other all day. But listen, how about just doing that with the Lord? When you really want to talk to God, you don't have to have anything to say. How about just text him. There you go. I don't know if y'all are that's perfect, but just treat God like that. Lord, how you doing? I mean, I don't know. Lord, thank you for the sunshine. Just be simple. Just be simple, but begin to do things that will help you put your mind on spiritual things. Because when you start putting your mind on spiritual things, you're going to start walking in the Spirit, which is going to make sure that you stay true to the foundations of your beliefs and the foundations that you really want to hold on to. And it'll help you to keep from compromising. All right? And just finally, I'm just going to sum it up. He tells them in Revelation, to you who overcome, I'm going to come to you. He says, I'm going to give you some of the hidden manna to eat. I'm going to give you a white stone, and it's going to have a name on it. It's going to have your new name on it. The only one who knows it is you. We know about manna, right? That's the angel food. That's God's food. He's miraculously fed the children of Israel with as they wandered around in the wilderness. And it reminded me of when the disciples had gone to get something to eat and came back when Jesus was at the well, and he had been with the woman at the well, and they tried to give him something to eat. He said, I'm not hungry. They said, what, did you eat something already? And he said, I have food that you don't know about. Listen, when we walk in the Spirit and follow God and begin to overcome some of these obstacles in our lives, there is a nourishment that comes into our life that comes only from heaven. He said, I'm going to give you some of that manna. I'm going to give you a white stone. It was a stone of acquittal when they voted in the courthouse. White was for acquittal, and black was obviously for guilty. And he said, so you're going to have this, you're innocent, you're acquittal. But the one I like the most is that it's got a name on it that nobody knows but you. And the reason I like that, you remember in the Old Testament, it's like every time God had a real encounter with somebody, he changed their name. Remember Jacob? And then they had that encounter where they wrestled, and then all of a sudden, you're not Jacob anymore, you're Israel now, right? God would have an encounter with people. It would be an encounter that would change them in a unique way, that would change them unlike anyone else had ever experienced God, and he would say, here's a new name. And this is the reason I like this. I like this new name, because it shows to me that every one of us has a unique, intimate relationship with God. Your relationship with God doesn't look like mine, and it shouldn't look like mine. It doesn't have to look like mine, because your relationship with God is with you and God, and he's given you a name with your new name on it. You know God in ways that I don't know God. You have experienced God in ways that I haven't experienced God, and vice versa. The same is true here. We all have a unique relationship with God, where God knows you, loves you, and works in your life. And it's that new name that only you know, or only you're going to know at the end when he gives you that stone. I'm ready to look at mine. Captain America? No. I'm just teasing. But it is a unique name for you. Y'all, listen. Go ahead and stand up with me if you would, please. Listen. Compromise. And look, Satan doesn't wake you up and just hit you in the face with a gross sin in a second. He leads you down a trail. And we take one little step at a time. And we get one little compromise at a time. And before we know it, we're way down that road. Listen. Compromise and sin. It's always going to take you farther than what you intend to go. It's going to keep you there longer than you ever intended to stay. And the consequences are really going to be more than you're really willing to pay. You need to remember that. You're going to go farther than you ever intended to go. You're going to stay there longer than you ever intended to stay. And the consequences are going to be more than you're going to want to pay. I don't know how God has spoken to you today. I don't know how you might need to respond to Him if you do in a public way. But if you need to respond to God this morning, you can do it while we sing. I'd love to pray with you if you'd like for me to. If you'd like to just come and kneel and pray at the altar, you can do that. If there's someone in this church who you know and love and you trust and you'd like to ask them to pray with you, feel free to go grab them and bring them down here and pray together. Whatever you need to do, you don't have to have the altar to do business with God. You can do business with God right where you are. But whatever you need to do with God, between you and God today, you do it right now while we sing.